the Toronto Star, I'm Sabah Itazaz, and this matters. Today's episode is for the bookworms and the pandemic readers who rediscovered the joys of picking up a good book while stuck in COVID lockdown. Obviously, Netflix has its charms, but the data shows many of us might have found our inner bookworm during the COVID-19 pandemic, with book sales surging during this time. But at the same time, 2020 was challenging for book publishers and sellers. No book events, no promotions, and a big shift to digital platforms. Many were still figuring out exactly how that works. All those holding back last year have seemed to come out with a bumper crop of books this season. Many of you might be looking for some good book reads to curl up with since it's COVID and it's winter. And there has to be more to life than Netflix, right? So I have the Star's books editor, Deborah Dundas, joining me today to talk about what's going on in the world of books and to recommend some of the buzzworthy titles to add to your list. Hi, Deb. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Hey, Sada. Thanks so much for having me. It's always fun.
It's great fun. So 2020 was quite a difficult year for the book industry in terms of promotions and events. We spoke about that last time as well, and some of the struggles that publishers were facing. What's your sense of the industry now at the start of 2021? Are things looking up?
Well, online sales went pretty well, I think, for many indie bookstores. They didn't match the sales that they would have had if they had in-person sales. But you know what? They managed to pivot and they managed to at least keep themselves afloat. When I was talking to people before Christmas, some of the indie booksellers in the city, they were saying, they were keeping steady. So that is good. I think for small publishers, it was still tricky trying to get books out there and into people's hands because they had to rely sometimes on some of the bigger booksellers. So that's still tricky for everybody, I think. Bricks and mortar stores, we've just had another lockdown, right? Is that coming back soon? Who knows, right? I think people have pivoted. They're treading water. There's still books coming out. People are still buying books. So I think there's a bit of a wait and see. At the beginning of last year, when lockdown first happened, it was devastating to sales. But because now we have the experience of pivoting in terms of online sales and getting books in other ways, that, it's kind of plateaued a little bit anyway. And we'll see what happens from here on in.
And we're sort of learning how to navigate the pandemic and carry on with our day-to-days.
Exactly.
And I also saw in our Toronto Star Books newsletter, which of course I subscribe to, that you've been talking about 30 of the most anticipated books for the new year. That's just in the first half, 30 books. That's a lot of titles, right? Is this a bounce back in a way?
Do you know what? I struggled to hold it to 30 titles, and it's true. I mean, there's so many coming out. I wanted to try and give some space to some of the indie booksellers and some of the smaller titles that look really, really good to me. But there are tons coming out. I mean, Oprah, she just did one and she did 55.
Wow.
And that's not even including Canadian titles. So it's hard to pick. I mean, part of it is taste. Part of it is what I think is going to really do well and is really going to strike a chord with readers. So 30 it is. And there's a lot of good reading in just those.
Well, I'm very happy that there was this big list to choose from for more of my pandemic reading. So when you were making this list, obviously you've read these books. Do you have a personal favorite so far from what you've read? What are you most excited about?
Well, first, I haven't read all of them yet because they're not all out yet. I have galleys of a lot of them. I've read quite a few, actually. I've read The Push by Ashley Audrain. I've read J.L. Richardson's Gutter Child. I've read a couple that aren't even on here. Gabriel Byrne's Walking with Ghosts, his memoir. So, there's a lot of good stuff out there.
What do you like, Deb?
My personal favorites that I'm looking forward to right now are two in particular: New Yorkers, a City and Its People. And that sounds a bit bland, but this guy, Craig Taylor, who lives out in BC, he did this with a book called Londoners a few years ago. And what he did was he got Londoners to tell the story of what they do in the city, what the city means to them, how they live in it. And he put all of these hundreds of people together, between the pages of a book, and they told the story of the city. And it was fabulous because you're not seeing it through a narrated voice, you're seeing it from the inside. So the picture that it paints was really, really great. And it stuck with me for a long time. And so when I saw that he has done the same thing with New York, which, we all like to go and visit if we can.
When we could.
It would be good, wouldn't it? Right? It's the next best thing to traveling right now. So I'm really looking forward to that one because the stories are just so interesting to hear. I'm kind of hoping he does it for Toronto at some time. I would just love to read that. So another of my favorite ones, my personal favorites, is The Mission House by Carys Davis. She's just such a wonderful writer. I fell in love with her short story collections, and this is a novel. And her stories, her writing, she sucks you in and then twists in directions you never see coming. So hopefully I'm not going to be disappointed. So I can't wait to get my hands on that one. That's kind of the whole conceit of this, right?
These are some good titles to look forward to. Mm-hmm. What other fiction books are making a splash already? You've spoken about The Push quite a bit.
Yeah, Ashley Audrain's The Push has already made it. It came out on January 5th, one of the first books out, and it's already made it to the top of the bestsellers list. Not quite to the top, but you know what? I expect it to go even higher next week. It's really well written. She's a former Penguin publicist. She worked on this book after she gave birth to a couple of kids. It's a thriller. It's a look at motherhood and sort of ask questions like, what if you don't actually like your kids? There's this whole idea that we have to be mothers, that we have to, fulfill this role and that we have to actually enjoy it. And what happens if you don't? So it's a thriller that goes along those lines. It's really a well-written page turner, and I quite liked it. And it's great book club fare.
We'll be right back. And Deb, what books by BIPOC authors should we be reading to kick off our 2021? Any big titles or debuts that are on the horizon?
A couple of debuts in particular. J.L. Richardson, she's the founder of The Fold, the Festival of Literary Diversity that runs out in Brampton. And her book is called Gutter Child. It's sort of a dystopian world that takes a look at what happens when there's inequality, a lot of social justice criticism right now, told in a very accessible way. It's not pegged as a young adult title, but it's got that really accessible sort of language and storytelling. So it's going to do very, very well, I think. Another one that's sort of interesting in the BIPOC stream is While Justice Sleeps by Stacey Abrams. She's the woman many people say, saved Georgia and saved the election. So you wouldn't expect a politician like that to be coming out with a book, but this is what she's done. It takes place in the halls of the Supreme Court. So people will be looking forward to that. It's something a little different from her. One other book, J.L. Richardson works with a woman called Amanda Leduc at The Fold, and Amanda has written a book called The Centaur's Wife. Now, it's sort of fantasy and fairy tales. Now, she had written a book last year sort of criticizing fairy tales and noting that anybody with a disability was always cast as a terrible person, as somebody who was going to do wrong. The stepsisters, the ogres, things like that. They were always ugly and horrible. Now, that's not a great thing when you're a kid, when, all the fairy tales, if you're disabled, are saying, look, you're not a nice person. So The Centaur's Wife kind of fixes all that. It's fairy tales with a disabled protagonist, and it's kind of great.
That's awesome. And there are also a lot of splash-worthy names coming up with brand new books this season, right? Kazuo Shigeru is coming out with one for the first time in, I believe, a number of years since he won the Nobel Prize. And then there's Angie Thomas of the Hate U Give fame. She's got a new book coming out. And there's a sequel to the 2016 Pulitzer Prize winner, The Sympathizer. So all of these books.
Absolutely. It's amazing. Now, Ishiguro's book book is Clara and the Sun. And it's the first book since, he won the Nobel Prize 3 years ago. And it's the story of Clara, an artificial friend who tells her story from her place in the store where people come and look and, go to buy her. So it's from her point of view, which is really quite interesting. And now Angie, with The Hate You Give, that featured Star Carter, obviously. So this new book, Concrete Rose, goes back to Garden Heights 17 years before The Hate You Give, where we meet Maverick Carter, her dad, as a teenager. So it takes a look at going into multi-generational experiences and giving a wide look at how you end up with people being shot and where we are now and how you get out of it, The Committed is the book by Nguyen, the author of The Sympathizer. And this has been so highly anticipated. It's tough coming out with the second book after a first one. So there's a lot of eyes on this one. And from all I've heard so far, I haven't read it yet myself, but from all I've heard so far, it's a great follow-up. So I can't wait to get my hands on that one.
Same here. And what do you think might be among the most anticipated Canadian books for the season?
Well, aside from J.L. Richardson's and Ashley O'Jane's, I think Eden Robinson's Son of a Trickster, those Trickster books have just gone like crazy, and they've been on the bestseller list for years. People have just fallen in love with them. And so was the CBC. The Trickster television series was based on the books, and that's even before this third in the trilogy came out. So it's the last one in the trilogy, and we'll see what happens with all the characters, but it's certainly really one that people are looking forward to.
And what about nonfiction titles for the season? Do you have any in mind that we should be trying to get our hands on?
There's a lot of biographies from celebs coming out this season.
Oh.
Cicely Tyson's coming out, Sharon Stone, Gabriel Byrne. So those are sort of interesting. A couple that I'm looking forward to, Lauren Hoff, she's an essayist in the US. Her first book of essays, Leaving Isn't the Hardest Thing, is coming out. And she wrote an essay a year or two back about being the cable guy. Oh, it was a wonderful look into Middle America, and it was so beautifully written. It went viral. Everyone was talking about it. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing what else she's going to do in these essays. And then there's a sort of smaller book. It's called Her Name Was Margaret, from former Hamilton Spectator reporter called Denise Davies. And this woman, Margaret, was homeless. And Denise Davies got to know her when she was homeless and going through the medical system. And then Margaret died, but she allowed Davies a peek into her medical records. And then her family told her a lot about Margaret. So you get a sense of who this homeless person was. So Her Name Was Margaret is this person who was on the street that many of us would have walked by, would not have paid any attention to. And I think it's a very important book.
So it seems like this is going to be quite a busy season for you with all of these books that you're talking about. Some have come out, some are coming out. And I hear there's some more interesting things brewing on the horizon for us soon as well, in terms of books and literature and what you're going to be doing.
Absolutely. I've got some sort of interviews coming up. I'll be doing Ashley Audrey for the Toronto Public Library on February 2nd. And, we never like to give away who we're interviewing in advance because, we like readers to come back to our pages and be surprised and delighted, right?
We won't tell anyone. You can just tell us on this show.
To be surprised and delighted. So we've got lots of good interviews coming up and reviews. And, there's going to be a few surprises along the way. And I'm really looking forward to them.
All right. Well, thank you once again for updating my book list. It seems like 2021 is going off on a really good note for me. I hope it's for all things and not just book related. Thanks so much, Deborah.
Thank you, Saba. It's always a pleasure.
I was talking to the Star's books editor, Deborah Dundas, about the top reads for 2021 so far. That's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Sabai Tazaz, Adrian Chung, and Raju Mudhar. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So-Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.